Urban legends have a way of slipping into our lives when we least expect them. Stories whisper between friends, tales passed down through generations, and warnings that come from places we can't quite explain. Tonight we're diving into 3 of the darkest legends ever told. Stories that blur the line between myth and reality. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and listen closely, because some legends don't stay in the shadows for long.
Story 1. Hachishakusama. 8 feet tall, or Hachishakusama, is a Japanese urban legend about a tall woman who abducts children. She is 8 feet tall, wears a long white dress, and makes a sound like My grandparents lived in Japan. Every summer, my parents would take me there on holiday to visit them. They lived in a small village, and they had a big backyard. I loved to play there during the summer. When we arrived, my grandparents always welcomed me with open arms. I was their only grandchild, so they spoiled me. The last time I saw them was a summer when I was 8 years old. As usual, my parents booked a flight to Japan, and we drove from the airport to my grandparents' house. They were delighted to see me, and they had a lot of little gifts to give me. My parents wanted to have some time by themselves, so after a few days, they took a trip to another part of Japan, leaving me in the care of my grandma and grandpa. One day, I was playing out in the backyard. My grandparents were inside the house. It was a hot summer's day, and I lay down on the grass to rest. I stared up at the clouds and enjoyed the feeling of the soft rays of the sun and the gentle breeze. Just as I was about to get up, I heard a strange sound. I didn't know what it was, and it was hard to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded almost like somebody was making the noises themselves, as if they were just saying over and over again, in a deep, masculine voice. I was looking around, searching for the source of the noise, when I suddenly noticed something in the distance. Something on top of the tall hedges that enclosed the backyard. It was a straw hat. It wasn't resting on the hedge, it was behind it. That's where the sound was coming from. Then the hat began to move, as if someone was wearing it. The hat stopped at a small gap in the hedge, and I could see a face peering through. It was a woman, but the hedges were high, almost 8 feet tall. I was surprised at how tall the woman was. I wondered if she was wearing stilts or some sort of huge heeled shoes. Then, a split second later, she walked off and the strange noise disappeared with her, fading into the distance. Bewildered, I got up and wandered back into the house. My grandparents were in the kitchen drinking tea. I sat down at the table, and after a while I told them what I had seen. They weren't really paying attention to me until I mentioned the distinctive sound. As soon as I said that, both of them suddenly froze. Grandma's eyes grew wide, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa's face became very serious, and he grabbed me by the arm. "This is very important," he said, in an intense voice. "You must tell us exactly. How tall was she?" "As tall as the garden hedge," I replied, beginning to get scared. My grandfather bombarded me with questions. Where was she standing? When did this happen? What did you do? Did she see you? I tried to answer all his questions as best I could. He suddenly rushed out into the hallway and made a phone call. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I looked over at my grandmother, and she was trembling. Grandpa came barging into the room and spoke to my grandmother. "I've got to go out for a while. You stay here with the child. Don't take your eyes off him for a second." "What's going on, Grandpa?" I cried. He looked at me with a sad expression in his eyes and said, "You have been liked by Hachishakusama." With that, He hurried out and got into his truck and drove off. I turned to my grandmother and cautiously asked, "Who's Hachishakusama?" As we sat there nervously waiting for my grandfather to come back, she explained what was happening. She told me there was a dangerous thing that was haunting the area. They called it Hachishakusama because of its height. In Japanese, Hachishakusama means 8 feet tall. It takes on the appearance of an extremely tall woman, and it makes the sound like in a deep, masculine voice. It appears slightly differently depending on who sees it. Some say it looks like a haggard old woman in a kimono, and others say it is a girl in a white funeral shroud. One thing that never changes is its height and the sound it makes. A long time ago, it was captured by monks, and they managed to confine it in a ruined building on the outskirts of their village. They trapped it using 4 small religious statues called jizos that they place at the north, south, east, and west of the ruins, and it wasn't supposed to move from there. Somehow, it managed to escape. The last time it appeared was 15 years ago. My grandmother said that anyone who saw 8 feet tall was destined to die within a few days. It sounded so crazy, I wasn't sure what to believe. When my grandpa came back, there was an old woman with him. She introduced herself as Ki-san and handed me a small, crumpled piece of parchment paper saying, "Here, take this and hold it." Then she and Grandpa went upstairs to do something. I was left alone in the kitchen with my grandmother again. I needed to go to the toilet. Granny followed me to the bathroom and wouldn't let me shut the door. I was beginning to get really frightened by all this. After a while, Grandpa and Ki-san took me upstairs and brought me into my bedroom. The windows were covered in newspaper, and lots of ancient runes had been written on them. There were small bowls of salt in all 4 corners of my room, and a small Buddha figure placed in the center of the room on top of a wooden box. There was also a bright blue bucket. "What's the bucket for?" I asked. "That's for your pee and poo," Grandpa replied. Ki-san sat me down on the bed and said, "Soon the sun will be setting, so listen carefully. You must stay in this room until tomorrow morning. You must not come out under any circumstances until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your grandmother and your grandfather will not speak to you or call you until then. Remember, do not leave this room for any reason until then. I will let your parents know what is going on." She spoke in such a grave tone that all I could do was quietly nod my head. "You have to follow Kisan's instructions to the letter," Grandpa told me, "and never let go of the parchment she gave you. And if anything happens, pray to the Buddha. And make sure you lock this door when we leave." They walked out into the hallway, and after saying goodbye to them, I closed the bedroom door. I locked it. I turned on the TV and tried to watch, but I was so nervous I felt sick to my stomach. Grandma had left some snacks and rice balls for me, but I couldn't eat them. I felt like I was in prison, and I was very depressed and scared. I lay down on the bed and waited. Before I knew it, I was asleep. When I woke up, it was just after 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I realized that something was tapping on the window. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my heart skipped a beat. I desperately tried to calm myself, telling myself that it was just the wind playing tricks or maybe the branches of a tree. I turned up the volume on the TV to drown out the tapping noise. Eventually, it stopped. That is when I heard Grandpa calling me. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. "If you're scared, you don't have to stay in there all alone. I can come in to keep you company." I smiled and rushed over to open the door, but then I stopped in my tracks. I had goosebumps all over my body. It sounded like Grandpa's voice, but somehow it was different. I couldn't tell what it was, but I just knew. "What are you doing?" Grandpa asked. "You can open the door now." I glanced to my left, and a chill went down my spine. The salt in the bowls was slowly turning black. I backed away from the door, my whole body trembling in fear. I fell to my knees in front of the Buddha statue and clutched the piece of parchment tightly in my hand. I started desperately praying for help. "Please save me from Hachishakusama," I wailed. Then I heard the voice outside the door saying, The tapping on the windows started up again. I was overcome by fear, and I crouched there in front of the statue, half crying and half praying for the rest of the night. I felt like it would never end, but eventually, it was morning. The salt in all 4 bowls was pitch black. I checked my watch. It was 7:30 a.m. I cautiously opened the door. Grandma and Kisan were standing outside waiting for me. When she saw my face, Grandma burst into tears. "I'm so glad you're still alive," she said. I went downstairs and was surprised to see my father and mother sitting in the kitchen. Grandpa came in and said, "Hurry up, we've got to get going." We went to the front door, and there was a large black van waiting in the driveway. Several men from the village were standing around it, pointing at me and whispering, "That's the boy." The van was a 9-seater, and they put me in the middle, surrounded by 8 men.
Keisan was in the driver's seat. The man on my left looked down at me and said, "You've got yourself in quite a spot of trouble. I know you're probably worried. Just keep your head down and your eyes shut. We can't see it, but you can. Don't open your eyes until we've got you safely out of here." Grandpa drove in front, and my dad's car was following behind. When everyone was ready, our little convoy started moving. We were going fairly slow, around 20 kilometers per hour, maybe less. After a while, Keisan said, "This is where it gets hard," and started muttering a prayer under her breath. That is when I heard the voice. I clutched the parchment Keisan had given me tightly in my hand. I kept my head down, but I peeked outside. I saw a white dress fluttering in the breeze. I was moving along with the van. I was Hachishakusama. She was outside the window, but she was keeping pace with us. Then suddenly, she bent down and peered into the van. "No!" I gasped. The man beside me shouted, "Close your eyes!" I immediately shut my eyes as hard as I could and tightened the grip on the piece of parchment. Then the tapping begins. The voice became louder. There was tapping on the windows all around us. All of the men in the van were startled and on edge, muttering nervously to themselves. They couldn't see 8 feet tall and they couldn't hear her voice, but they could hear her tapping on the windows. Keisan started praying louder and louder until she was almost shouting. The tension inside the van was unbearable. After a while, the tapping stopped and the voice disappeared. Keisan looked back at us and said, "I think we're safe now." All of the men around me breathed a sigh of relief. The van pulled over to the side of the road, and the men got out. They transferred me to my dad's car. My mother held me close and tears were running down her cheeks. Grandpa and my father bowed to the men, and they went on their way. Keisan came to the window and asked me to show her the piece of parchment she had given me. When I opened my hand, I saw that it had completely gone black. "I think you'll be okay now," she said, "but just to be sure, hold on to this for a while." She handed me a new piece of parchment. After that, we drove straight to the airport and Grandpa saw us safely on the plane. When we took off, my parents breathed a sigh of relief. My father told me he heard about 8 feet tall before. Years ago, his friend had been liked by her. The boy disappeared and was never seen again. My father said there were other people who had been liked by her and lived to tell about it. They all had to leave Japan and settle down in foreign countries. They were never able to go back to their homeland. She always chose children as her victims. They say it's because children are dependent on their parents and family members. This makes them easier to deceive when she poses as their relatives. He said that the men in the van were all blood relatives of mine, and that's why they had been sitting all around me, and why my father and grandfather had been driving in front and in back. It was all done to try and confuse Hachishakusama. It took a while to contact everyone and get them all together, so that is why I had to be confined in my bedroom all night. He told me that one of the little Jizo statues, the ones that were meant to keep her trapped, had been broken, and that is how she escaped.
It gave me the chills. I was glad when we finally got back home. All of this happened more than 10 years ago. I haven't seen my grandparents since then. I haven't been able to so much as set foot in the country. Afterwards, I would call them every few weeks and talk to them on the phone. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that it was all an urban legend, that everything that happened was just some elaborate prank. But sometimes, I'm not so sure. My grandfather died 2 years ago. When he was sick, he wouldn't allow me to visit him, and he left strict instructions in his will that I wasn't to attend his funeral. It was all very sad. My grandmother called a few days ago. She said that she had been diagnosed with cancer. She missed me terribly and wanted to see me one last time before she died. "Are you sure, my grandma?" I asked. "Is it safe?" "It has been 10 years, she said. "All that happened a long time ago. It's all forgotten. You're all grown up now. I'm sure there won't be a problem." But what about Hachishakusama?" I said. For a moment there was silence on the other end of the phone. Then I heard a deep masculine voice saying,
Story 2. Talent. The Talent is a scary story about a young girl who seems to have the ability to predict deaths. My little sister Zoe is 13 now. I really love her, and I think I owe her my life. I was 7 years old when she was born. I was so excited to finally have a little sister. At first, I was jealous that she was getting all the attention from my parent, and I didn't pay much attention to her. Sometimes I was just downright mean to her. However, that all changed on the day I realized that my sister has a special talent. We were sitting on the couch, watching TV, when Zoe suddenly said, "Daddy isn't coming home." I was confused. "What did you say?" I asked. "Daddy isn't coming home," she repeated. I was quite unnerved by this and tries to question her further, but she wouldn't say anything more. About half an hour later, the phone rang. When I answered, there was a police officer on the other end, and he sounded gravely serious. He explained that there had been a traffic accident. My mother was in the hospital with relatively minor injuries, but my father had not been so lucky. He dies on the way to the hospital. The next few hours were a blur. I just switched off the TV and sat there in shock, staring at the blank screen. I was numb. They said Zoe was too young to grasp a situation, but she understood that Dad was gone and he wasn't coming back. Almost a year later, there was another incident. It was a nice, warm and sunny day, and Zoe and I was at the park. Zoe was playing on the grass, when all of a sudden, she stopped and pointed at something. "That's a bad man over there," she said. "We need to go." When I looked in the direction she was pointing, I saw a man nearby. He was dressed in a gray hooded sweatshirt, he had his hands in his pockets, and seemed to be waiting for someone. But something about him seemed strange. With the memory of our father's death still fresh in my mind, I didn't question Zoe. I just grabbed her hand, and together we hurried home. The next morning at breakfast, my mother was reading the newspaper, and I noticed the headline on the front page. "Mother and daughter stabbed to death in a park." Beneath it was a picture of the police leading away a man in handcuffs. It was the man in the gray hooded sweatshirt. A chill ran down my spine. Any doubts I had before were immediately quashed. My little sister definitely had a talent. From that day on, I listened carefully to anything she had to say, and I would write it down in a notebook I kept in my room. One day, when Zoe was 6 years old, it happened again. We were at a restaurant when Zoe suddenly dropped her knife and fork, looked at my mother and I, and said, "Grandpa's gone." An hour later, my mother got a phone call telling her that our grandfather had passed away in his sleep. Mon was very upset, but she had been prepared for the bad news. That was the last prediction for a long time. As the years passed, I gradually forgot my sister's talent. It got to the point where I began to dismiss it all as a coincidence. However, last week, when my girlfriend and I were spending some time together in our apartment, I got a text message. It was from Zoe.
"I need to tell you something.
What is it?
I need you to listen to me. I have a terrible feeling. Something is going to happen. You and Megan need to get out of there. Go to a hotel or something. Just get out of there."
Why? What is going on?
I don't know. I told you what I know. That's all I know.
Okay, I understand. Bye, Zoe.
I immediately grabbed my girlfriend, forced her to pack some things in a suitcase, and rushed her out of the apartment. We went to a nearby hotel and booked a room for a night. The next morning, I got a call from our neighbor. He said that our apartment had been broken into, but strangely nothing had been taken. When he heard strange noises, he called the police and they arrested the intruder. We had to go down to the police station. Apparently, Megan's mentally unstable ex-boyfriend had broken into our apartment. He was armed with a knife, and he was planning to kill both of us. When my girlfriend heard that, she was utterly dumbfounded. All she could say was, "How did your sister know?" Without Zoe, we would have been both dead. It still haunts me. Nobody else believes it. And my girlfriend is still skeptical, but I know what happened. My little sister has a talent.
Seventh Barn, the Seven Barns, is a scary urban legend about a haunted barn in Ohio that is believed to have been the scene of the grisly murders of an entire family. There was a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of land in Ohio. He built a new barn on his property every time his wife had a baby. He named the barns after each of his children, and by the time this story takes place, they had 6 kids and were expecting number 7. However, the farmer's wife died in childbirth, and so did her unborn baby. The farmer went insane with grief and couldn't tend his farm. The family had no money, and the farm started going under. They say that one night, in the depths of his madness and despair, the farmer took an axe and led his children out to the barns where he murdered them one by one. He buried each of the bodies in the 6 barns that had been named after them. Then, the farmer went to the 7th barn, where he hung himself. As the story goes, all of the barns were eventually torn down and the land was sold off, all for except the 7th barn. Nobody wanted to buy the land because of what happened there, so it was abandoned and soon fell into disrepair. They say if you go to that barn at night, you can see the ghost of the farmer hanging from the rafters, his body swinging back and forth in the wind, dwelling on his terrible crime for all eternity. No one was ever really sure where the 7th barn was located, although it was definitely in Ohio. Some said it was the Kranz farm in Cuyahoga Valley, and others said it was at Top of the World in Northampton. In 1997, a local Ohio teacher claimed that after a lot of research, he had finally managed to track down the real location of the infamous 7th barn. He said that none of the barns had ever actually been torn down. The land had just been divided up and sold off, and the barns had simply been incorporated into neighboring farms. According to the teacher, he was able to pinpoint the correct location because all of the barns on neighboring properties had nameplates above their doors with the names of children engraved on them. The teacher and his son set out at night to visit the barn, bringing a video camera with them in hopes of capturing some paranormal activity. The next morning, the teacher's wife reported her husband and son missing. Police found their abandoned car by the roadside. While searching the area, they entered a barn in a nearby field and found the dead bodies of the teacher and his son hanging from the rafters.
If you're still here, congratulations. Most people don't make it through all 3 legends without feeling something watching them. Remember, every story starts as a rumor until someone finds proof it was real all along. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me which legend kept you up tonight. Sleep well, if you can.